Imagine being in a fighter jet and peering into the windows of a commercial airplane only to find, to your horror, no one was moving and everyone appeared dead, except for one lone, terrified survivor. This ghost flight was eerily silent, peaceful almost, culminating in one tragic end. The aircraft involved in the flight was a Boeing 737-300 manufactured in 1998 and registered as 5 Bravo Delta Bravo Yankee, with the serial number 29099. In the captain's seat, we have German Captain Hans-Jürgen Merten, 59. He was a contract pilot hired by Helios for holiday flights who'd been flying for 35 years and accrued 16,900 flight hours, including 5,500 on the Boeing 737. Beside him is First Officer Pampos Charalambos, 51, a Cypriot pilot who'd flown exclusively for Helios for the past 5 years and had accrued 7,549 flight hours in his career, including 3,991 on the Boeing 737. Aboard the flight and accommodated by Chief Flight Attendant 32-year-old Luisa Voteri are 115 passengers with a total of 6 crew. The passenger list included 93 adults and 22 children. Everyone aboard other than Captain Merten were either Cypriot or Greek nationals. The aircraft landed at Larnaca International Airport in Larnaca, Cyprus, from London earlier in the morning on August 14, 2005. The previous flight crew had reported a frozen door seal and abnormal noises coming from the right aft service door, and thus they requested a full inspection of the door. This inspection was carried out by a ground engineer, who then performed a pressurization leak check. To carry this out without using the plane's engines, the pressurization system was set to manual. Crucially, the engineer forgot to reset the system to auto upon completing this pressurization leak check. If you're enjoying this video, leave me a like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know down in the comments section. After the aircraft was returned to service, the new flight crew overlooked the pressurization system state on 3 separate occasions. First, during the pre-flight procedure, second, during the after-start check, and lastly, during the after-takeoff check. During these checks, no one on the flight deck noticed the incorrect setting. The aircraft was scheduled for takeoff at 9 a.m. and took off 7 minutes later at 9:07 a.m. with the pressurization system still set to manual and the aft outflow valve partially open. As the aircraft climbed higher and higher into the air, oxygen density decreased, and the pressure inside the cabin also decreased. The aircraft soared through an altitude of 12,040 feet and the cabin altitude warning horn sounded. The warning should have prompted the crew to stop climbing, but it was misidentified by the crew as the takeoff configuration warning, which signals that the aircraft is not ready for takeoff and can sound only on the ground. The alert sound is identical for both warnings. In the next few minutes, several warning lights lit up on the overhead panel in the cockpit. One or both of the equipment cooling warning lights came on to indicate low airflow through the cooling fans, which is a result of the decreased air density, accompanied by the master caution light. The passenger oxygen light illuminated when, at an altitude around 18,000 feet, the oxygen masks in the passenger cabin automatically deployed. Shortly after the cabin altitude warning sounded, Captain Merten radioed the Helios Operations Center and reported, quote, "The takeoff configuration warning on," and, quote, "cooling equipment normal and alternate offline." He then spoke to the ground engineer, the same one that did the pressurization leak check, and the captain repeatedly stated that the, quote, "cooling ventilation fan lights were off." The engineer asked, quote, "Can you confirm that the pressurization panel is set to auto?" However, Merten, already experiencing the onset of hypoxia's initial symptoms, disregarded the question and instead asked, quote, "Where are my equipment cooling circuit breakers?" This was the last communication with the aircraft before the captain and first officer fell unconscious. The aircraft continued to climb until it leveled off at flight level 340, about 34,000 feet. Between 9:30 and 9:40, Nicosia Air Traffic Control repeatedly attempted to contact the aircraft without success. At 9:37 a.m., the aircraft passed from Cyprus Flight Information Region into Athens Flight Information Region. Without making contact with Athens, the 19 attempts to contact the aircraft between 10:12 to 10:50 were also met with no response, and at 10:40, the aircraft entered the holding pattern for Athens Airport, at the Kia Vor, still at flight level 340. It remained in the holding pattern under the control of the autopilot for the next 70 minutes. As the aircraft flew in an aimless loop over Athens, the Greek military decided to intervene. If you like history and disasters, make sure to check out my other channel, Shipwreck Sunday. Sources differ on if they were contacted by Athens ATC or if they chose to intervene themselves, believing this may have been a possible terrorism incident. At 11:05 a.m., two F-16 fighter aircraft from the Hellenic Air Force 111th Combat Wing were scrambled from the Nia on Helios Air Base to establish visual contact. They intercepted the passenger jet at 11:24 a.m. while it was undergoing the sixth loop of the holding pattern and observed that the first officer was slumped motionless at the controls and the captain's seat was empty. They also reported that oxygen masks were dangling in the passenger cabin. At 11:49 a.m., flight attendant Andreas Prodromo entered the cockpit and sat down in the captain's seat, having remained conscious by using a portable oxygen supply. Early media reports erroneously claimed his girlfriend and fellow flight attendant, Haris Charalambos, was also seen in the cockpit trying to help him, but this is false. The official investigation report published in October 2006 said the F-16 crew only saw one male in the cockpit and did not mention DNA evidence. Prodromo held a UK commercial pilot license but was not qualified to fly the Boeing 737. Prodromo waved at the F-16s very briefly, but almost as soon as he entered the cockpit, the left engine flamed out due to fuel exhaustion, and the plane left the holding pattern and started to descend. Crash investigators concluded that Prodromo's experience was insufficient for him to gain control of the aircraft under the circumstances. He did succeed, however, in banking the aircraft away from Athens and toward a rural area as the engines flamed out, protecting those on the ground from perishing as well. Some evidence indicates he tried to wake up the pilots and his girlfriend, all of whom were in a deep coma by that time. 10 minutes after the loss of power from the left engine, the right engine also flamed out, and just before 12:04 p.m., the aircraft crashed into hills in the vicinity of the village Grammatiko, 25 miles from Athens in East Attica, killing all 121 on board. Rest in peace to the 121 who died aboard Helios Airways Flight 522, and much respect to Andreas Prodromo for his courage in saving many potential victims in Athens. Many of the bodies recovered were burned beyond recognition by the post-impact fire. Autopsies on the crash victims showed that all were alive at the time of impact, but whether they were conscious could not be determined. The emergency oxygen supply in the passenger cabin of this model of Boeing 737 is provided by chemical generators and can provide enough oxygen through breathing masks to sustain consciousness for about 12 minutes, normally sufficient for an emergency descent to 10,000 feet, where atmospheric pressure is sufficient for humans to sustain consciousness without supplemental oxygen. Cabin crew have access to portable oxygen set with considerably longer duration. You want to know what's really frustrating? This aircraft had had issues with pressurization very recently before this ultimate failure. On December 16, 2004, during an earlier flight from Warsaw, the accident aircraft had experienced a rapid loss of cabin pressure, and the flight crew made an emergency descent. The crew reported to the captain that a bang had been heard from the aft service door, the same one complained about in this story, and that a hand-sized hole was in the door seal. And during the 10 weeks prior to the accident, the aircraft's environmental control system had been repaired or inspected 7 times. The aircraft was known for getting very cold and having issues with the air conditioning too. The investigation report done by Greece's Air Accident Investigation and Aviation Safety Board listed the direct causal chain of events that led to the accident as, firstly, the non-recognition by the pilots that the pressurization system was set to manual, secondly, the non-identification by the crew of the true nature of the problem, thirdly, incapacitation of the crew except Prodromo due to hypoxia, fourth, eventual fuel starvation, and lastly, the impact with the ground just outside Athens. Due to clear negligence, 121 people lost their lives in a horrific accident that never should have happened. Rest in peace to all of those who lost their lives on Helios Airways Flight 522.